The pace of product innovation in the industry is accelerating. If you don't want to be left behind, if you want to keep users on your site and give them all the features that they are going to come to expect, you should talk to our sponsor, PropTex, who are absolutely at the forefront of making real estate portal experiences absolutely the best in class. Hello and welcome to the PPW Pod, bringing you news, views, and interviews from the world of real estate marketplaces. Joined for today's episode by Simon Baker in Miami. How are you, Simon?
I'm doing very well, enjoying a beautiful sunny day. So sorry for everyone else in Europe.
Yeah, and by Giles Thorne, who is, I believe, in London.
That's right, very cloudy London.
So Giles, thank you for coming on. You are somebody I've really wanted to get on because you have written the most complete, well thought out and structured take on the threat to real estate portals by AI that I've ever read or even come across. Well, why don't you explain who you are and what you do, actually?
Very good. Well, look, thanks for the feedback. That is that's the holy grail for people like me. So I'm an equity research analyst. I work at an investment bank. I work at Jefferies. The role of an equity analyst is multifaceted, and it's quite a privileged role because we sit at the center of quite a complex ecosystem, and we have lots of people that might be interested in what we think. And really, that's our role, is to be, I guess, to use cheesy language, a thought leader. So it's to think about things like agentic AI a bit more deeply than the average, and cultivate views on risks, rewards, opportunities, threats, and then ultimately distill that down into a written product, which is a research report that we can then use to discuss with primarily investors. But like I said, there are lots of stakeholders in my world, including stakeholders within the bank and private companies. And the output is, alongside the written research, is stock ratings. We have ratings on stocks. Sell Rightmove, buy Hemnet, whatever it may be. So I am a bog standard equity analyst, but I will take that positive feedback very kindly. Thanks.
What stocks do you personally cover?
So I am a European internet analyst, and European internet, up until maybe a year ago, was fairly evenly split between food delivery businesses and online classifieds businesses, and then a couple of other special situation type stocks. And over the past year, most of the food delivery guys have disappeared for reasons that are interesting, though less relevant to this conversation. So European internet coverage nowadays is dominated by online classifieds, and it's the names that you will know very, very well and discussed often in this forum. So the Hemnets and the Rightmoves and the Scout 24s, but not just the property guys, also the automotive guys like Auto Trader, and also the horizontals. So BCG, SMG, Ben. So the full coverage. I'm not sure there's a European online classifieds name I don't cover. I think maybe there's a smaller ones out towards the east that I don't cover, but certainly all the household names, as it were.
Right. And so including like Baltics Classifieds Group and I guess because they're LS, the London Stock Exchange anyway. So you would cover them.
Yes. Plus they're a fabulously interesting company to cover. So yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry, Ed.
It's all right. I want to tee up. We'll get straight into the main question, which is the threat to real estate marketplaces from AI or agentic AI overblown currently? And if so, why?
Understood. Well, look, there's the short answer and there's the long answer. The short answer is, as I titled in my note from 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think the agentic AI fears are overdone. The long answer, unfortunately, is very long. The challenge that we have, and not just people in my seat, but people in your seat and investors and all stakeholders within European classifieds, is proving or disproving the case one way or another. And while I sit and celebrate the nice feedback you gave me on my note, and I think it's a good note that's relevant and timely, ultimately, I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have a magic wand to prove that agentic AI fears are overdone. So I think we just all have to recognize that fact and kind of weave that into the conversation. Look, the reason I think agentic AI fears are overdone, and it's hopefully very intuitive, and frankly, in marketing the note with investors and others for the past 3 weeks, I'm not really feeling any pushback. But the reason I think agentic AI fears are overdone is because the very nature of the things being transacted on these platforms, namely properties and cars, is of a sufficient level of sophistication and complexity that discovery of those things, finding what's out there, is always going to be a better experience within the ecosystem of a well-invested classified advertising platform, which is a hell of a mouthful, but instinctively it should ring true that these classified advertising platforms have something that no one else has, which is now decades of proprietary data. And a well-invested classified advertising platform will convert that data into signals and intent that can then be critical, mission critical, to a seeker at the point of discovery. And the example I always give at this point in the conversation, which I accept is not property related, but it's I presented it in the notes, so I'll flag it here, which is if you bring up an automotive listing on Auto Trader and then you find the identical listing on davesmotors.co.uk, to all intents and purposes, the listings look identical apart from two things. Firstly, a dealer rating, and secondly, a value indicator. And those two things are there because Auto Trader at some point over the past 20 years has hired a clever data scientist that can convert transaction prices into a value indicator for this Audi A3 or whatever it may be. And it's my view that that type of insight at the point of discovery for these type of things, namely cars, is absolutely critical. Therefore, seekers will continue to use these platforms. There's a few caveats, and I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah. No, I want to dive into a bunch of that stuff because I think
there's a couple of caveats that I've mentioned it, I think, twice, and I'll say it again. Caveat is the well-invested platform. And we'll
that's what I wanted to bring that up as well, but I'll let Simon jump in.
Oh no, I think there's a bunch of interesting questions here, and let's talk about data and being well invested later, because I want to talk about the because you're really sorting. Portals sort for two problems. One is for the searcher, and the other is for the seller or the agent, the in between. And often with cars, it's the dealer actually owns the stock, so they're motivated to sell as fast as possible because it's just money sitting in the car rather than sitting in their bank account. Versus the home seller who's fundamentally living in the house. So there's different sell cases in this versus automotive versus housing, and the search case is different as well. Right? I love your example there about cars because I was looking. I'm in Miami for part of the year, so I was looking at buying a car the other day, and all I cared about was, is this a good deal? I'm looking at doesn't matter what I'm looking at. So I'm looking at a Range Rover, 5 years old. Is this overpriced, underpriced versus the market for that car? Because they're sort of vanilla, right? That's a Range Rover with X, Y, and Z. Houses, of course, every single house is fundamentally different from every other house for a lot of reasons. And portals don't tend to put is this underpriced or is this overpriced on the website for the very obvious reason that would then fundamentally annoy the crap out of their advertiser, who's not the home seller, right? The person who owns the house. It's the intermediary who doesn't want to be selling a house that's undervalued because the home seller is going to go, what are you doing? And if it's overvalued, they're going to go, what are you doing? Right. And so I think so let's just talk about discovery for the moment. Why do you think generic LLMs, agents searching for you, won't provide a better experience or an equal experience to the well-invested portal? Why do you think? Oh, and let's think about that over time, right? There's go back a year, we're now here, but let's go back then we go forward a few years.
So look, this is part of the reason. This is the reason, I guess, why I mentioned in my opening statement that very hard to disprove or prove any of these things because the dynamic around the LLMs is things are changing rapidly. There's a huge amount of flux. Indeed, we might even get to the end of this year and OpenAI will be going bust, and we'll look back on January and say, why were we worrying about agentic AI in the first place? So it's very, very hard. This is a movable feast. I found my metaphor at last. It's a movable feast. And actually, this was why the title of the note from 3 weeks ago was keeping a weather eye on AI, because it's a recognition that things are changing and we've got to keep a weather eye on it. But look, I touched on it, but the answer to your question, Simon, I touched on it already, which is data. The platform business model, any platform lives and dies by its utility. Ultimately, platforms exist to create some kind of efficiencies in the way that people go about doing something, and then migrate some kind of behavior from over there to onto the platform. And if you do a very good job of that, if you create a lot of value, then you can monetize it. And if you can do it better than anyone else, then you will eventually build a network effect around your business model that makes your monetization very, very defensible. And that's ultimately why this was a gold standard, is a gold standard pool of equity that's very, very popular with investors. That was a lot of words. What sits behind that are 1,000 small things done perfectly every day. And the reason why I think an LLM is ultimately going to struggle to match the utility of a well-invested classified advertising platform is because, once again, of that magic little word, data.
Yeah. So
these are all incumbent platforms that have been, I mean, in Rightmove's case, around for like 25 years. In fact, I'm getting memories now of seeing a few 25-year celebrations popping up in LinkedIn feeds, one from Rightmove and I forget the other. But these are not new businesses.
they've
And
been
they're
around a
well
lot longer than they're actually 30 years old. Some of these businesses,
Fine.
like the REA Group in Australia, is 30 years old. But
There you go.
but then the question is what. Now, this data is an interesting concept with this, right? There's data about the house, there's data about a location, there's data about me as the individual and what I'm looking for, and it's all about if I'm on the search side or the discovery side, I've got to be able to help me find something that I didn't know existed, but is a better match for what I want, right? Depending whether it's price or whatever, X, Y, Z, right? That's true discovery. If you think about it. How do you think they've got data, good data on, I can understand they've got data on properties going back a long year because they've been advertising a property. It may have come up 3, 4, 5 times over the last 20 odd years. Assuming they've got good data sets from the early days. Now, there's a big assumption there, right? That they actually did invest early enough in these data sets. Do you think they've got good other data around what it's like to live in an area, what it's like to, because I think that's part of that discovery process. Okay. I won't disagree about them having data because they've got great data, but do they have the right data?
Yeah. So look, the short answer to that one is no. Let's be honest, part of the great fanfare around CoStar when they rocked up in Europe and indeed when they pushed harder in the United States was the rich media content and the fleet of drones and the proprietary data on local neighborhoods that really illuminated the listing and was relevant to the seeker. But as I consider it in Europe, I don't think these platforms have, as I sit here in Hammersmith and I think about the last time I looked at Rightmove, I didn't really get much flavor for the area. So I think the answer is no. When I talk about data, what I'm talking about is, again, the decade plus data lake full of tens of petabytes of data around what people have done when within the app or the website. And that comes in 1,000 different flavors. From the dwell time on picture number 3 through to the timestamp between posting a listing at number 7 Smith Close and the time it came down, and everything in between. And the progressively minded platform, and I use the words well invested and progressive often in the same sentence, I'm looking for progressively minded management teams with an R&D budget to match, That's a direct quote from the front page of the note. The progressively minded management teams see that data as something that can be harnessed, something that can be manipulated, something that can be turned into an insight or a signal. And then they've got to find a good product person that can package it into a product that's then useful to, in this example, a seeker trying to discover what's out there. And this is where slowly and empathizing, because the LLMs do not have that, and they will not get it. Back to you.
Okay, so I like how you're thinking about this, but it sort of raises some interesting challenges. So let's say, we use Ed as an example here. Either A, I've been tracking Ed's visitation to, let's say I'm Rightmove, to over the last 20 years for various things, right? Through life stages, from leaving university, I don't know, share accommodation, rentals, getting married, house with kids, whatever, that journey, right? And that's the ultimate, right? Is it knows my journey, and it's almost predicting before I know it that I need to upgrade my house for whatever reason. So that then you say, great, so it knows that about me, or people like me. Maybe it's cohorts, right, of people, for probably various GDPR issues in this whole process. Then isn't the next step to then customize my experience? So when I go to the Rightmove or engage with Rightmove, however I engage with it, my experience and Ed's experience and your experience will be three fundamentally different experiences, because we're at different ages and stages of life and wanting different things and so on. And if that's the case, how does that impact the underlying business model that is fundamentally built on inefficiency, not efficiency? So the business models of most of these portals are all about putting the person who paid the most for the ad at the top of the search, even if that ad is not what I am, the consumer, looking for. Doesn't that sort of then fundamentally go to the heart of the business model and start to negatively impact it?
No, I wouldn't see it that way. I think the first thing to say is what you've described as a utopia that we're nowhere near. When I talk about petabytes of data and converting it into signals that are relevant to the seeker, I'm talking about like the micro things, like going to a listing on Rightmove and being told 5 people have looked at it that day, that's a useful insight to me at the point of discovery. What you're describing is the utopia of a rich data set that knows us better than we know ourselves, and can ultimately then, as you say, provide that very tailored, hyper-personalized, cross-the-cycle experience. We are nowhere near any of that. And indeed, the impact on the business model, come the time that does arrive, I dare say is going to be someone else's problem, because I think I would have moved on by then. Nonetheless, shooting from the hip, it comes back to what I said, which is these businesses live and die by the utility of the platform to the people that use them. And in that utopian scenario that you've just described, there is still value to a bank in the platform knowing that Giles is going to turn, not going to give my age away, but let's say getting married next year, or has just got married and is probably thinking about having a baby, and therefore might be a good mortgage lead. So I agree. By that point, the traditional frictions that these platforms were addressing will have disappeared, but there is still value in the insights that they can throw up to somebody trying to do business in this ecosystem, in property or in automotive. So it's why I use this word progressive. Progressive is this idea of just constant change, constant movement, constant thinking. It's not black and white. It's not absolute. It's what's next? Like, what's around the corner? What can I do in 5 years' time that I'm not doing today? And as I sit and listen to the management teams in these companies, you can say, you can see quite clearly the ones that are progressively minded and the ones that are.
You mentioned progressively minded. The other kind of caveat in there was companies that actually invest, right?
Yeah.
Is it perhaps the case that, so we saw a lot of the companies that you cover as an analyst, their share price has fallen off a cliff in the last 6 months. Is it perhaps a case that some of these companies needed to announce big investment strategy anyway, regardless of any hype around AI or anything like that. They have been fundamentally underinvested in for a long time. And although this AI wave, or whatever we're calling it, has seen their share price fall off a cliff, it may have fallen off a cliff anyway, simply because they were underinvesting.
So there's a huge amount there, and this has been the talking point for the past 3 to 6 months. And isolating what's driven a share price move into agentic AI fears and what we would call stock specific stuff is hard to do, and I'm not sure how you would do it really. But so nonetheless, my answer to your question would be if I go back to the summer last year, the beginning of the summer, I was getting roughly 1 email a week about agentic AI. And the only public forum debate around agentic AI I saw was indeed on this little podcast called the PPW Podcast, where you had Mal McCallion on talking about the Rightmove resistant talk. My point being, you're going into the summer, there was no debate in the investment community about agentic AI really, and certainly no fear. And then you came back from the summer into the autumn, and you had a conflation of events that took fear from 0 to 100 miles an hour. And the events I would call out were Swiss marketplace IPO, which was a successful IPO, but it naturally required a big chunk of the investment community to come together and debate a stock and debate a business model and just get people thinking about these things. And then the second thing you had, and this was probably the big one, which was Rightmove. So the Rightmove strategy update, which I know you covered in your own forum, was a real, dare I say, omni-shambles. And the reason I use the word omni-shambles is because just optically it was very messy, like suspending 5-year revenue guidance, second advice cycle in 2 years, investing into the core while your previous investments into strategic growth areas have been walked away from. It just optically it was awful. But there was the backbone of the narrative within the strategy update was AI's coming, AI's exciting, we want to invest to harness it. And you then got them talking, and it was like, well, most of the money is actually going back into the core, like support the core utility of the platform as a place for an agent to list and for a seeker to find a property. So the market just saw it as defensive, reactive behavior by an over-earning incumbent. And that's what took fear from 20 miles per hour at this point in time up to 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. So was that for that Rightmove example? Is that just a case of you've been profiteering for a decade? You've underinvested is the way it is. Another way to think about it. And it's just biting you in the ass now, right? Because you now have to invest to catch up, or invest to at least stay even.
Well, look, perhaps Johan and Rory will be watching this at some point, and they know my views on the business. So I would be inclined to agree with your characterization, Simon. Yeah. But I don't want to put it as boldly as that, because I think Johan was a fantastic hire. I was very surprised when he took the role, and I immediately thought the business was going to go on a more progressive trajectory. And of course, they are now reallocating capital away from shareholders towards investing into the utility of the platform. What I suspect is what they're doing now are things that Johan instinctively wanted to do 2 or 3 years ago, and perhaps should have been done 5 to 10 years ago.
But if we think about that, I mean, Rightmove, I always find Rightmove a super interesting case of leverage. The ultimate of leveraging a brand. Right? I've got such market strength that I'm just going to leverage the brand to put my prices up. I always wondered what people did there, right? Because I always thought, you probably turn up on at the beginning of the year, think about the price increase for the year, and then just execute against that, and then do it again, because there was that lack of investment. But if you are taking away from shareholders, reducing your EBITDA margin down from the mid 70s to probably, I don't know what the guidance was, but we'll call it mid 60s. You'd have to spend a fair bit to catch up.
Mhm.
Are you going to be able to increase your revenues sufficiently to offset the investment in EBITDA and to continue to deliver growth in the overall EBITDA number? And if so, where is it going to come from? Because the agents aren't exactly going, I've got more to give you.
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question. And this is why I remain fairly negative on Rightmove, because there is a period of investment. They're putting 60 million quid into the business over the next 3 years in OPEX and in CAPEX. And it is a
Is that
period of
so was that 16 or 60?
60
60, okay.
into both OPEX and CAPEX over the next 3 years. And we are entering a period of slightly slower top line growth. I don't have the numbers open in front of me, but from memory, slightly slower top line growth before it accelerates again. And the reason I have concerns is, well, one, of course, the take rate within the UK, for the reasons you kind of mentioned, Simon, does sit on the higher end of the scale, if not the highest end of the scale. And I would argue, they might vociferously disagree with me, but I would argue that that has been achieved by leaning back on the network effect. And now this business has got to go out and spend £60 million over 3 years on hiring people and building technology infrastructure, which has execution risk around it. So the business sits in a difficult position where they're trying to tune up the car while driving at 100 miles an hour. And that's before you take into consideration Zoopla's out there, twice rumored last year to be on the block. And as you both know very well, there's really only one buyer for that. And that one buyer would represent in-market consolidation, which does act as a constraint on a market leader. And then you've also got this £1 billion damages claim. So you're trying to tune up the car while driving at 100 miles an hour. And I don't know, clumsy metaphor now, but 90% of your revenue is coming from people that are suing you. So
yeah, so there's a couple of things in there which I'm curious about, right? If you're going to invest £60 billion, what are you actually investing in? Million, not billion. Billion would be funny, right? Million, right? If you're going to invest in £60 million, what are you investing in? Because if your fundamentally take rate is, let's say, at the top end globally, okay, and you can't get into a vendor paid advertising world, which is the sort of like the next door you would try to go through to pass on the costs to the home seller. So you're stuck at taking money from the agents. You're investing in to do what? To maintain the take rate? Is it? I can't see how you're going to get another 20 or 30% on top of what you're already getting out of that agency pool, because I just don't know if there's anything there to take. So I'm just wondering what's the investment for?
yeah, so ultimately these are platforms, and platforms are digital ecosystems. And the things that you see and use when you go to these platforms are ultimately products and features that have been built by a clever product developer, supported by a software engineer writing decent code, which in turn is supported by a data scientist that's turning data into some kind of insights. And then all of it is maintained by a technology infrastructure team that kind of bookends around it. So you've got those kind of four elements combining to deliver, going back to my auto trade example at the top of the conversation, to deliver that value indicator that you see. So the money they're spending is, to repeat, it is on mix of OPEX and CAPEX. From memory, most of it is on OPEX, which is people. They are hiring people. They are going to good universities and getting data scientists who just completed their PhD to come and take this data lake of whatever it is, dwell times on picture number 3, and say, what could that tell me that would be useful to pick a stakeholder, an estate agent?
Yeah. So I guess what they're fundamentally doing is investing into the business to maintain the take rate?
So
Okay.
this is where the difference between someone like me, who's quite negative on Rightmove, and somebody else who's quite bullish on Rightmove would be, because I would argue that this investment is going in to backfill, to support an existing take rate that is on the edge of being exposed by a resurgent on the market or whatever it may be. Whereas somebody
Yeah.
who's bullish would say, no, this is going to unlock all these new profit pools.
Yeah, I'm on your side. I think anyone who thinks they're suddenly going to get into the mortgage business or whatever is smoking dope, to be honest. Right? Because the number of people who've tried it over decades and have yet to create material meaning 20 or 30% of the complete revenue is very limited. And if it does occur, it's in markets where the underlying market structure is very different, MLS type structures or whatever. So I'm absolutely agreeing with you that I think this is like, oops, we should have been investing $6 million a year for the last 10 years rather than trying to do 60 at the end to then continue to justify. I actually wasn't aware of this. What's this £1 billion claim? I'm curious about this one. We probably covered it.
We covered
I know
it.
it doesn't mean I paid it. Doesn't mean I paid attention. And there might be other people out there who aren't paying attention either.
Yes.
What's the quick summary of this thing?
That appeared a few days after the strategy update on the 7th of November. So it must have been like 10th or 11th of November, picked up in the trade press. And this is a class action lawsuit being led by a gentleman called Jeremy Newman, I think, who is a city grandee, former CMA panel member, Grant Thornton, former partner, somebody kind of steeped in the UK PLC firmament, and funded by Elliott Advisors. Interworth Capital is the vehicle that's funding it, and Elliott funds Interworth Capital. And they've signed up a shark-eyed US litigation firm whose name I forget right now, but there's a crack team of advisors put together to build a case against Rightmove. And the core of the case, as you might imagine, is abuse of a dominant market position.
Okay.
Now,
so now this is coming back to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was quite big news.
So I know, Ed, you got your hand raised, so you can ask the question, because I never use the function, but I should.
I'm really interested in the framework, Giles, that you. So where I'm coming from with this, I wrote an article not so long ago, essentially saying, agentic AI fears are a bit overblown in the portal space, and it was a list article with no paywall, and it's just coming out of the top of my head, essentially. What you've done in the note that we've been referencing here is you've actually built a proper framework, and you've gone a lot deeper in that you've actually said, some of these companies are more at risk than others. And I'm really interested in the framework because, to me, at least, on a surface level, it makes a lot of sense. So I've got it up here. Why could you kind of walk me through the kind of flow chart of why, let's say, sorry, Rightmove, but we're going to use you as an example. Why Rightmove is under more threat from AI than, for example, Scout24, because they're both similar sized companies in similar sized markets with roughly similar positions as market leaders. What are the kind of flowchart steps to arrive at that conclusion?
Understood. Okay, well, look, not to waffle on for too long, but look, you mentioned the flow chart, and then it's in the note. The first step was, look, what's your business model? Are you a classified advertising platform, or are you an online marketplace? And if you're an online marketplace, agentic AI fears are irrelevant to you. Hence why I quite like Auto One, and the food delivery guys will be fine on this front. So then you get into classified advertising, where the model is to list something, create some efficiencies, remove frictions in the way that people discover things, and then monetize. So if agentic AI represents an attack, a threat around discovery, specifically seekers seeking something, use an AI agent rather than going to Rightmove or Auto Trader, then the people that advertise on Rightmove and Auto Trader will think, why am I wasting my money on that platform? The utility of that platform to originate a buyer lead is broken. That's, the risk. So if you think about that a bit more deeply, the first kind of layer of defense or the first dimension to consider the risk is, well, what percentage of your content is only on that platform? So the first line of thinking was, okay, well, what percentage of your listings content is private? Because by definition, a private individual is not going to create gileshouse.co.uk. I'm just going to give it to an agent. The agent will put it up on Rightmove. So hence I use horizontal versus vertical platforms. Vertical platforms kind of by definition having more professional advertised content than a horizontal platform, which would be listing cars, secondhand bikes and iPhones and so on.
So we're saying potentially FSBO listings are a bulwark against
Yes.
potentially AI search here.
Yeah, because the AI agent, if I've sold my bike, my rubbish single speed bike, the only place I would put it, and therefore the only place an AI agent would find it, is on Gumtree, whatever it is. The next kind of stage in the framework was, well, look, what is the incentive for the person advertising on your platform to come off? So that was just a consideration of take rate. If you've got a high take rate, then your advertisers are probably looking for an alternative. And if there's a low take rate, if your advertisers are paying next to nothing from their commission pool or gross profit pool, then they probably don't care and they're not looking for an alternative. And then the third layer down, or we now fourth layer down, and this was the final layer, was, well, look, how well invested is your platform? How progressive has your mindset been? How big is your R&D budget been? What is the utility of your platform? Is it an Internet 1.0 Craigslist type listing platform? Or is it somewhere like Scout that has already launched a AI-powered chatbot and has both a private and professional business? And so you just put I put every name in my coverage through that simple analytical framework, and the names that screen well, favorably, are the Scout 24s and the Swiss marketplace groups. And then the ones that screen badly were the Rightmoves and the BCGs.
Is it a case of, quite simply, those that have treated their customers really well over the last, and the advertisers in particular? Because if you think about it, every day real estate agencies don't change. If I go back to Australia, I talk to agents, and they're literally the same guys that were my customers when I was at REA 20 years ago. They're literally the same people are in the industry. Whereas the buyer, the consumer, you're not buying a house every day for the next 20 years. You're coming in for a fixed period of time, 3 or 6 months. You're doing the transaction, then you're probably disappearing off. You might dip in occasionally to keep an idea on what is happening. So the core customer you've always got to keep in the back of your mind is the one who's paying, is the one who's going to be there for the long journey. And if you have a reputation of low investment and high value extraction, it's very hard to win that trust back. It's almost, I would argue, it's almost impossible.
I think this is everything.
Yeah, if you have a reputation of, no, I'm going to invest in tools and technologies to make your life better, I'm going to give you some things for free, and so on. And if you look at what, say, CoStar's doing in the United States with your listing your lead, okay? Realtor.com, we chatted about on a podcast the other day, is very much focusing on agent tools and improving the overall advertiser experience. I think those businesses that have invested at that level then have the best opportunity to get access to all that historic data, all the stuff that's unique, that then allows them to have a front end to deal with these intermediate visitors in a way that because the good news is, Giles, you could visit Rightmove a year ago, buy a house or sell a house or whatever, and then dip out of the market, come back in 2 years' time. My experience of consumer interfaces is not limited to dealing with, let's say I'm in the US at the moment, to Zillow. It's Zillow, but then it's with Amazon. Then it's with, I was looking at Car Gurus the other day, and then I was looking at something else for something to do with my garden here. So I'm dealing with different interfaces all the time. Okay. So my expectation of interfaces and how I interact with technology is progressing. And what I expect back from that interface is also progressing at a great speed. So I think we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think this is fabulously important. And in this conversation, I've used language like utility and data scientists, and all very objective. But it's an equally important facet of being a platform, I think, to have the right ethos, a true partnership ethos. And it's very topical today. We had, over the weekend, the CEO of Auto Trader, Nathan Coe, was on Car Dealer Magazine podcast. And I don't know how closely you've been following news out of Auto Trader the past 2-3 months. Probably not very much, since it's not
only via your reporting.
Anyway, they had a big blow up. Like, they launched this very progressively minded, transformational, I think, product, Deal Builder. And they pushed harder on the commercialization. And in the process of the communication, they really pissed off a lot of dealers. And Nathan and the entire team have done an amazing job, I think, of getting out there and saying, we screwed up. We're sorry. They've hosted webinars. They've instituted an advisory council. Management there to go out and do DD liaisons. This appearance from Nathan on the Car Dealer Magazine podcast over the weekend was to once again say, mea culpa, I'm sorry, and these are the changes we've made. And I think having a strong partnership ethos goes a very long way to insulating any resentment around a high take rate. And I always go back to, in this part of the conversation, to the start of COVID, when we had the lockdowns and dealerships were shut and state agency branches had to close. And out of the 2 UK platforms, one stood up and said, we're going to do a rights issue so we can fund our R&D budget while we spend the next 6 months not charging you any money. And that was Auto Trader. And then you had another one stand up, albeit under old management, saying, don't pay us for 3 months. And by that, I mean, we're still going to charge you, but we'll do a payment deferral for 3 months. And that, you'll remember, crystallized the Say No to Rightmove campaign, which ultimately came to nothing. But I always use that as a good example, the different ethos. And I think having a partnership ethos is absolutely critical.
Giles, I want to talk a bit more about, so the in the note that we keep referencing, this report, it's really good. And we're not going to have time to go through all of the points that you make in it, but one of the kind of tantalizing things from it, and this is something that when I write, I just write completely speculatively if I talk about this, but you talk about the potential recovery of these stocks being U-shaped rather than V-shaped, and that is potentially an opportunity for private equity. And you kind of tee up the specter of private equity perhaps coming in for one of these big publicly traded names. Can you talk us through that? How is this potentially going to play out, do you think? Because it does seem like a big opportunity for private equity while some of these stocks are potentially undervalued.
Yeah, so not to sound, at the risk of sounding a bit patronizing, that there is an obvious difference in the investment sensibility. I mean, ultimately, private equity investors and public market investors use similar financial analysis and techniques when building their investment case, but their sensibilities are radically different. Of course, a public market investor has a daily market, whereas a private equity investor will only mark to market their investment whenever they try to come and sell it, really. So that massive dividing line in sensibilities at the point of investment creates, very different outcomes. And while I mentioned towards the top of the call that the notes had a lot of good feedback, like no one's really telling me that I'm a complete idiot. But the challenge that public market investors is not to be right on an earning stream, it's to be right on a share price. And because you can't prove or disprove these things quickly or easily, public market investors are not going to run back into these equities, I don't think. So you're going to have a inefficient market in these names for a year, maybe 2 years. And it is not uncommon to see private equity try to capitalize on those market inefficiencies. So a private equity and private equity and public market investor might agree, but the private equity guy is the one that will do the investment.
What I wanted to hear there was I can see, and I'm just going to name one, I can see Scout 24 getting taken over by private equity within the next 18 months. You're not going to come out and just say that, but
I can.
Yeah.
So there are 7 names, I think, in my coverage. There's only one of them that obviously the capital structure kind of makes it too difficult to do. Maybe 1.5. But I mean, most of them are just institutionally owned. So you just need to have a fair offer price and get the certain level of acceptances. So really, it could be a Hemnet, it could be a Scout, could be a Rightmove, could be an Auto Trade. What private equity will look for is a good management team, strong market position, a sensible take rate, and a runway of earnings. And they've all kind of got that. And then up on Rightmove, I would argue, but even in Rightmove's case, they could take it private, do all the investment that should have been done 5 years ago, and set it in 5 years' time in a much healthier trajectory. So really, any of them could go.
You've spoken, you just mentioned there, oh, no one's come out and called me stupid. And you've mentioned the Rightmove management.
And they often do.
We're going to use Rightmove again as an example. I'm very sorry to Rightmove. How much do the portals or the companies that you cover read and react to what you do, and how much kind of access do they give you as an analyst to their team or to their numbers? Because that's an interesting one.
I like to think that management teams and boards are sitting around a little table every night reading my research and amending strategy to reflect what I'm saying. But of course, that is just simply not true. At the very best, there is a long dotted line from what I write through to what companies do. I have no shame in admitting that sometimes I see my job as a glorified journalist. So I don't think there is much reaction in management teams and boardrooms to what I write. However, any sensibly minded management team would recognize that analysts like me are a lever to control their cost of capital. And every management team should care incredibly deeply about their cost of capital. So if someone like me is saying something that's completely wrong, or maybe completely right, they should engage, because it will influence public market investors that then influence their cost of capital. So unfortunately for them, they cannot ignore people like me, albeit they don't wake up thinking, I'm not stakeholder number one.
Okay, so you're a few levels above me, because they can definitely afford to ignore me.
Yeah, no, they're very ignorable. There's a lot of ignoring going on. There is a lot of ignoring going on.
I have three quick questions. Actually, all quite different. The first one is, we talked about AI, but we haven't talked about Google. Google recently have been doing some experimentation of putting results directly into the search results page. Their search results page, putting property listings at the top, coming from some brokerages in the US direct. Is that potentially, just short term at least, equally as damaging for a portal, given the portals still are reliant on Google traffic. Amazingly enough, they're still reliant on Google traffic all these years later.
Well, look, I think things like that are very damaging to sentiment, investor sentiment towards these names. Stepping back, Google is Google. It's like one of the greatest companies ever created. And it's not beyond the wit of man to say they could do anything they wanted anywhere, anytime. So we have to pay firm lip service to that. In terms of classifieds, they flirted with classifieds. I mean, you'll be aware of course, this latest property thing in the US, but Google Vehicle Ads has been a product that's been bobbing around for a few years in both the US and in Europe, doing a similar thing, serving up dealer listings directly in any search return. It's almost certain that should Google want to do classified advertising, they could. But in this point of the conversation, when debating this with an investor, I always come up with the kind of same metaphor, same anecdote, which is if you are the head of corporate development at Google and you are pitching to the investment committee or whatever it is within Google that decide to allocate capital, is pursuing Rightmove's 300 million euros of revenue really the type of thing that they want to be doing? It's just not a very big pot of gold. There is no pot of gold. And despite everything I've said about Rightmove, these businesses are all deeply entrenched incumbents. And in Rightmove's case, their brand predates Google's and, dare I say, has a top-of-mind awareness as high as Google's here in the UK. So if you are Google trying to disrupt Rightmove around property, like, are you really making that business case within Google? I just don't think you are. So
it's a funny thing. I always remember back in 2006, so 20 years ago, Google started putting listings, real estate listings, on their maps. As you know, people are going to be searching, and that lasted about 10 minutes. But that 10 minutes gave me a lot of headache when I was the CEO of REA, because I had the head of News Corp calling me going, you know, what the hell, is this the end of the business, and so on. Okay, because they hadn't thought through. You got to think through the most fundamental issue here is your customer who's paying you is a small business in general, right? Real estate agencies are small businesses. And B, they don't self-serve. And you've got to remember those 2 points. That's why Rightmove and everyone, all those guys have got a deeply invested in building relationships with these agents, and they've put in a team of people who can walk in and go have coffee with an agency principal to extract more money or whatever over time. So I think we forget that. Now I've got a second sort of question. We're now going to get a little bit more macro. Right.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on the missed opportunity for the REA Rightmove deal?
So, I mean, the loser was people that held onto the Rightmove equity since September 2024, because of course the share price is off a huge amount since. The question of REA's ongoing interest in Rightmove comes up a lot, and it's my view that, well, one, predicting M&A is always a fool's errand. M&A is an art, and there's 1,000 variables that need to line up, and 90% of those variables you can't see. So I always give that caveat, but I struggle to see REA swinging back to have another go at buying Rightmove.
And it's a combination.
It's a new CEO who's an external hire, not a lieutenant of Owen Wilson. Co-Star's now in their neighborhood, and we can all have a view on Co-Star's ability to disrupt, but they weren't there back in September 2024. Thirdly, Andrew Fisher remains the chairman of Rightmove, and he stonewalled the last approach, ultimately killing the momentum of the deal. So I think, why would REA want to run back into that brick wall while Andrew Fisher was still there? Albeit maybe Andrew would be a bit more conversation on the phone with the share price where it is. And then we all recognized back then that it was a financially driven approach. ultimately the strategic and industrial logic of REA buying Rightmove isn't that compelling, but the financial logic was. And then people say, well, look, Rightmove's a lot cheaper than it was, to which I say, well, yes, but they're using equity to buy Rightmove, and the multiple of the REA equity to Rightmove equity back then was 1.5 times, and it's the same now. So yeah, Rightmove's cheaper, but so is REA derated. So it's not like the financial logic's got any better either. So, I mean, famous last words, I'm sure when this goes out, the Bloomberg headline will be there saying REA purchased Rightmove, and there'll be another one. I could chalk up another Giles Thorne special prediction, but
probably not going to occur. I got a feeling that when your share price is off at REA by as much as it's off, and I think $6 billion worth of value has disappeared over the last 6 months, you've got other issues to focus on rather than trying to go buying an asset at the other side of the world. The big question is going to be, what are you going to do about CoStar? And CoStar has sort of gone all in, if you think about it, right? They're all in on buying number twos, and they've got to make them work. Otherwise, and CoStar is a much larger company financially and market cap and revenue generation than REA Group is anyway. So I think that's it. Now my third question is going to be, we talked about well invested and progressive. What happens if you're not well invested? So you're one of the smaller ones, or I guess you can either be well invested, not progressive, underinvested, and not progressive, which we clearly know is death. Right? Don't worry, Ed will come back. Okay. Third is you can be underinvested. You can be whatever the other two are, right? If you're thinking about that 2x2 matrix, and you are someone who is underinvested, so you're a smaller business and you don't have access to the capital, are you sort of dead man walking at this point in time? Is it just a matter of time before you disappear? And the LLMs will sort of replace what you can do?
I go back to my framework. If you've got a large percentage of your content that's private, you're very well insulated. If the take rate's low, then you're very well insulated. Yes, you might be over earning, but you can always flip that. You put a budget together every year towards the end of the year, and you could decide to go out and spend 20 million quid, whatever it is, on hiring some people to build things. So that'd be my first, point number one. Point number two, you can get away with doing nothing for a very long time because of that network effect. But that chicken eventually does come home to roost. But it can take a very, very long time. We're talking decades.
Yeah. And we've seen that with Rightmove. Man, we've talked about it to death, but at the end of the day, underinvestment. And I think a lot of these portals who are trundling around at that sort of 50, 60, 70% are in danger of having underinvested, especially now with this sort of evolutionary change that AI is providing.
Yeah, well, look, this is perhaps neatly landing us where we started the conversation, because I think the legacy of agentic AI within this little corner of the internet will not be the disruption it causes to incumbent online classified advertising platforms, but instead will be one of those big milestone moments that reminded us all that you only ever want to own equity in the platform that builds stuff. And if you go back 3 or 5 years, equity investors into European online classifieds were holding up the high earning, solid growing, strong market leading equities as the best names to own. And the people that were a bit more progressive, the scouts of the world that were doing a consumer business, they were held up 5 years ago as being a bit Mark Zuckerberg metaverse. But where we stand now, I think we're going to
metaverse. I remember that.
I think we're now going to flip the script, where investors are going to be like, okay, I want to only earn equity in the business that is got, the core, then some, medium-term bets, and then 1 or 2 moonshots.
Okay.
because you know that management team are never going to leave any white space for Sam Altman to come and eat their lunch or somebody else to do something.
Yeah.
And so I think we're entering. I think that will be the legacy of agentic AI within the investment community for the European online classifieds.
It's about finding the niche of the internet where you are a high value. And I had a story. I had a great conversation. That was with Ed actually this morning about what is the true IP that, for example, online marketplaces has, and it's the fact that you got 15 to 20 years worth of stories, contacts, information about the industry that exists in little pockets. Some of it doesn't exist at all. It's just stuff that we've accumulated over time. And that, as you talked about, unique listings, right? Same concept. If you've got something that no one else has, then you will be incredibly relevant. If you have the same as everyone else has, then you can only do what the US portals have to do, which is compete on user experience. And that, we all know, is a very, very hard job to do and requires a lot of continuous investment. We just see Homes.com's come out with this, AI-driven, user interface and so on. So my last question, which is neatly tails into what you're talking about. I've got here your summary of changes, right page. You've got 8 businesses: Vend, Rightmove, Scout24, Hemnet, AutoTrader, SMG, Swiss Marketplaces Group, BCG, Baltic Classifieds Group, and Auto One Group. Out of them, right, what's your favorite and what's your least favorite and why?
Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be no surprise given the content of this conversation. And indeed, I think my compliance department might be jumping down through the phone if I said anything else. But no, we like the Mark Zuckerberg metaverse people. We like the Scouts and the SMG, the Swiss Marketplace groups, because they're building stuff, and they've been building stuff without any monetization within a 2-year time frame. They built product that isn't going to be monetized within the next 2 years. And they've done it across every corner of their ecosystem. Whereas the names I don't like, the Rightmoves and the BCGs, I mean, fair play to them. They are, very ROI focused and only build things that they can sell tomorrow. But in the current environment where you've got a backdrop of radical and rapid technological change, I think having that kind of laser one-dimensional focus is going to do you a disservice.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think what I've discovered over way too many years, nearly 30 years in this industry, is that Scout24 has always been one of these businesses where they keep doing interesting things. So they for example, and I can never remember the name of the product, but monetization of the buy side. Right? Most people don't monetize the buy side. They've done a good job at monetizing the buy side. No one said they had to. They could have just continued to do what they were doing.
Yeah.
But they are happy to go out there, invest, still maintain a good EBITDA margin, which I can't remember what it is. It's sort of in the 50s, isn't it? Like 50, low 50s or something. And so on. But I think that difference where they've given up maybe 10 percentage points, they could have had maybe more, is going to be reflected in their long-term capacity. I think the other thing that's super important, and you can't put on a spreadsheet, is the internal culture or the natural culture of these sort of businesses to be innovative. And in the world of AI, and I've dealt with a lot of, and I'm trying not to go down the world of stereotypes here, but I've dealt with a lot of companies that it takes forever to make a basic decision on anything. And then I've dealt with other companies who are once they make the decision, they're very laser-like and efficient in how they execute against it. And the speed of movement of AI means you want to be in the second bucket, not the first bucket. Because the problem is the first bucket, by the time you've made a decision, there's 3 generations have come and gone of what AI can actually potentially do and how it can help your business. And the guy who's making the fast decisions and then implementing well. So there's 2 is speed of decision making, and B is, and then the capacity to execute against the decision. If you've got 2 ticks, I think you'll be in a very, very good place. And I think Scout24 looks like a 2-tick box. I think the problem, the other issue, I think you can't also put on a spreadsheet for the Rightmoves and potentially the REAs of the world, is when you've been such a dominant, I can say it, player in a market, you lose innovation internally. You lose that the entrepreneurship, the natural way to experiment, try, fail. What do we learn? Great, let's do it again, do it again, do it again. Yeah, you run hackathons and all that sort of stuff, but it's almost performative in what it is. And it's to keep the internal guys happy that they're doing something that isn't really boring, like, move a pixel on a screen or change it from blue to red or whatever, right? Make a bigger banner ad that sits above the other banner ads in priority order so someone can go out there and charge, $500 more for it. And I think that's the thing that's going to bite these businesses hard, is the inability to realign their culture fast enough to be entrepreneurial enough to capture the true value from these products, or from what AI gives them as an opportunity. That's what I think is the real issue around this.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And the thing that I often reference in conversations is some of the best platform, as you would imagine. Again, it's pretty intuitive. As some of the best platform business models out there, some of the best platforms out there are the best because they are a reflection of how goddamn stubborn and difficult the underlying market was. They just had to be better. If they were going to survive, they just had to be better. And I was only put, the German attitude towards digitalization and doing things online is like, Scout has been carving the business out of granite for a very long time, and is all the better for it.
Yeah, and I, what I like is when you look at things like cars, they've got to be faster, more innovative, because there is another better mousetrap literally around the corner. And while the strength of brand is important, it's the underlying technology and how you apply it. And when you're dealing with such low margins, I mean, what's a dealer make on a car? $200, something ridiculously low, right, on a secondhand car. You've got to be innovative in how you provide products and services. And then you go to the true e-tailers out there. They're just living. I as a consumer can go and buy, I don't know, a new air conditioner from 10 different places. So why am I going to go to A versus B and C? And then you might go to Amazon because I know I'm going to have it delivered this afternoon. So until someone can equate to that requirement, whatever it is, okay, I'll probably keep going to them. And then Amazon just gets more powerful. And that's where we are.
All right, gentlemen, we've come almost to an hour and 10 minutes, so I think we'll leave it there. Giles, thank you very much for coming on. If somebody wants to read all the fantastic stuff that we've been talking about that you produce, how should they go about doing that?
Well, the truth is they've got to become a client of Jefferies. I'm afraid that's it.
That's fine. I mean, we're happy to plug that.
That's the business. That's our business. We monetize intellectual property. So yes, please send me an email at giles.thorne@jefferies.com, and I'll put you in contact with our research management to get you signed up.
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming on and discussing. I've got a whole load more questions that we could have answered. I'm sure Simon has as well.
We could do a follow-up in 6 months when hopefully I've not been proved radically wrong, and see where we are.
All right. Thank you for coming on, Giles. Thank you for your time, Simon. And we'll see you on the next episode.